It's tabletop time. I'm Jazza, and we're going to be talking about batch painting and Space Marines and nostalgia and modern techniques, a whole bunch of different stuff. But this all stems from what I shared with you a couple of months ago when I bought all of the classic models that I had in my long lost Blood Angels army that I had sold, but it actually spawned this video idea. I've asked the crew here at Tabletop Time to paint a Blood Angel in a style and approach that is batch paintable, so you can paint a whole army using these methods. The rest of the gang are going to share their paint jobs with you later, but I'm going to start off with mine, and I'm going to start off with using the base coat color to accentuate the color you're actually going with. And in this case, obviously Blood Angel's red, I base coated in a bluey purple and Zenithaled up to a red. This created a really interesting mix of tone down into the shadows, which I think works really well. Well enough actually that I think it's interesting and detailed enough that you can just move forward and paint the details and voila, you have your Blood Angels army. I wanted to use this to accentuate a really rich classic Blood Angels look. So I further highlighted by dry brushing up to white highlights on the topmost areas of the model. This could also be done with a dry brush, but I was keeping it pretty simple. And then I went over the whole thing with the Blood Angels red contrast paint. Now, contrast paints didn't exist when I was a hobbyist as a teenager, so it was really fun to get these results that I would have loved back in the day, but just wouldn't have been really possible with the tools that were available. And as you can see, it works really well. The Blood Angels red contrast paint sort of moves that bluey shadow towards the red, but keeps the complexity from the base coat, whereas the whites that I built up to a highlight aren't highlighted as a pink color, which sometimes is hard to avoid when you're trying to highlight Blood Angel's armor. But with that as the base coat, it was time to get onto the rest of the details. Pretty straightforward stuff. I painted the areas that would end up being metallic in black for the silver and a warp lock bronze, which is like a pretty dark, muddy gold for the base coat of where I would paint gold. My original Blood Angels army had golden shoulder pads and highlights, and look, I was really just excited about metallic gold paints because they felt really special. I'd never experienced metallic paints before, so I maybe used it a bit too much, but I had to, in my ode to my old paint jobs, bring in the gold. Other than that, painted in the details, dry brushed in the metallics, painted up the purity seal, and painted the eyes in a nice rich green, highlighting up to a light green, and then highlighting in white to create a bit of pop. The last things left were the base and the edge highlights and highlights. So I started off by putting down a bit of a muddy texture paint on the base, sprinkled on some ground texture just as like an earthy flock. And while that was drying, I moved on to the highlights, which was a mix between sort of an orangey red with a bright red, which ended up creating a nice sharp highlight look without going too close to the pinks that I'm trying to avoid here. With all that done, I finished off the base with a coat of goblin green to keep in that classic feel, sprinkled on that really vibrant short synthetic grass that was on old school gaming tables that looks so like early 2000s, I love it. And then rather than doing the base trim in the same goblin green or just going with the more modern approach with the black, I went in the middle with a dark green. And I think the result looks pretty cool.
My plan for my Space Marine was to use a Zenithal non-metallic metal style painting approach. Basically, I'd be painting more or less half the miniature. That's my game plan for a fast, efficient batch painting approach. To contrast the red, I wanted to start with some blues and greens. This would start as a really cool base and should add some real nice punch to the red later. So I started by simply heavily dry brushing all these darker colors over the top of the model, going everywhere. Then I started introducing a bit of red to the mix, more or less over brushing, making sure I didn't get it in some of the deeper recesses just to keep that nice shading. Then I started highlighting with straight Mephiston red. This went on really strongly, and I'm not too worried about if it's going to look a bit harsh in some areas. I can always feather it back in the most obvious and jarring areas later. It's all about speed at the moment. That's the key to batch painting. Then with a couple of touch-ups done, I did some very simple highlights on various parts of the armor, the parts that are most facing upwards towards the light. And then I did a simple and very scuffed approach of a non-metallic metal on the bolter. This was probably a bit lavish for such a model, but it was pretty quick and I think it came out pretty well. And since this is a fairly modern approach to painting, I decided to use some of the Armageddon Dunes technical paint on the base to get that really cool quick finish, and then gave some finishing touches in the form of some Gamer's Grass ferns. This will add some real nice punch of colour to the base and make this really cool arid and alien world, which I think is fairly novel.
Originally when starting this project, I had decided I wanted to try and go for a non-metallic metal look. I realized that this was probably going to take way too long and I needed to speed things up. So I decided to try another method I had had my eye on for a while. To start things off, I made my Space Marine just as basic as possible. I wanted him to look like the 50 other Space Marines you'd have to end up making, generic as possible, get him done, get him ready. After he was assembled, I sprayed him down with some Chaos Black for a primer, and then afterwards I sprayed him with Lead Belcher, which is a silver primer spray. This would be the metallic base of the model. To begin the painting process, I wanted to start off with all of the red on the model. I used a combination of Vallejo red and a gloss mixture to lay down all my red. After all of the red was laid down and dried, it was time to go in with the details. I grabbed some Vallejo green and yellow just to do the trimmings of the model. Lastly, I just went in with the black ink to cover his gun and any of the metal pieces that were sticking out and needed to be dulled down a little bit. For my basing, I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. I use AK Terrain's Dark Earth for some of the basing texture, along with some Flock and Flowers, again from Gamer's Grass. Now that my Space Marine was all dry, it was time to just give him a little bit of a silver trim to really make those edges stand out. I did this using a Scale 75 Speed Metal paint.
So when I think painting a new army nowadays, I start to think about the most efficient way I can do it. Nothing sends me around the twist faster than painting 40 Space Marines that all look near identical. So the most efficient way to knock those out so you can spend your time on the elites and special units, the better, in my opinion. So when I approached this model, I immediately thought of airbrushing. This would allow you to paint an entire group of squads in a single session. To do this, I sprayed them Abaddon black to make sure all the recesses were nice and dark. And then I sprayed down from above in some Zenithals with purple. Once the model was a black to purple tinge, it was time for me to start building up reds, using two different tones of reds, coming in first of all from a 50% side angle to catch most of the surfaces, and then once again from above as a true Zenithal in a brighter red. After doing this, 80% of the surface area of the model was already fully painted. For the metallics, I used true metallic metal paints with a wash. I used Scale 75 golds and silvers, and then came in with that beautiful Reichland flesh shade on the Aquila. Using true metallics definitely evokes the classic Games Workshop feel, and I'm a fan of them for quick paint jobs. I painted the gun in the classic Blood Angel scheme, just matte black with metallic silvers. The last step to finish off a model is always the base, and I could not look further than that beautiful bright green base. I went and grabbed some Vallejo Scorpion taupey green and painted the base. That was the closest approximation I could find of the classic White Dwarf look. After doing that, I grabbed some cheesy green static grass and laid that down over the base to perfect my 1990s Space Marine vibe.
It is with heartfelt gratitude and deep inappropriate passion that we thank our patrons.
Oh dear.
Welcome Shayna Hurd and Tim Talbot to the patron family.
Welcome Adam Rogers and Bearthurf.
Wandering Pilgrim Games and Madison Kimball.
And ahoy hoy to he hello.
So there you go. We all finally batch painted a single unit. What's the
verdict?
Yeah.
If you want to airbrush your army and have your Blood Angels painted where each model takes you like half an hour, do it my way.
I went to smile and look at it, but I looked at the mic and then I'm like,
Hey.
no, that's a mic. This is a huge mic.
It is.
Look at it.
Like a big flamingo coming into.